I'm April Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. My parents just met my boyfriend Marcus for the first time, and my mother hasn't stopped staring at her wine glass since he walked into our family dining room. The silence is so thick you could cut it with the silver knife she's gripping like a weapon. My father cleared his throat 3 times already, which is his tell when he's trying to process something that doesn't fit his perfect little worldview. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to how this disaster started. I'd been dating Marcus for 8 months when I finally worked up the courage to bring him home to meet my parents. 8 months of pure happiness with a man who treated me like I was precious, who listened when I spoke, who made me laugh until my sides hurt. But I knew my parents well enough to be nervous about this introduction. My parents, Robert and Linda Thompson, live in the kind of pristine suburban neighborhood where everyone's lawn is perfectly manicured and every mailbox matches. Dad's a financial advisor who's built his entire identity around being respectable, and Mom volunteers for all the right charities while making sure everyone knows about it. They've always been obsessed with appearances, with status, with making sure everything in their world looks exactly how it should. I should have seen the warning signs when I first mentioned Marcus to them. Not once did they ask about his personality, his job, or how he made me feel. Instead, Mom immediately wanted to know his last name, where he went to college, what his parents did for a living. When I told them his name was Marcus Johnson, I watched something shift in their expressions. Johnson. Such a simple, common name. But the way they processed it, you'd think I'd said something scandalous. The dinner itself was a masterclass in polite racism. Mom set the table with her finest china, the kind she usually reserved for Easter and Christmas. Dad wore his best suit, like he was preparing for a business meeting rather than meeting his daughter's boyfriend. They were trying so hard to be impressive that it felt performative, almost mocking. Marcus arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably in a navy blazer and carrying flowers for my mother and a bottle of wine for my father. He was charming, articulate, respectful, everything any parent should want for their daughter. But I watched my parents' faces throughout the evening, and what I saw there made my stomach turn. They were polite. Painfully. Obviously polite. The kind of politeness that feels like ice water. Dad asked surface-level questions about Marcus's work, nodding at appropriate intervals but never really engaging. Mom smiled her practice charity event smile, the one that never reaches her eyes. When Marcus complimented the meal, she thanked him with the same tone she'd use with a delivery driver. What hurt most was how hard Marcus was trying. He shared stories about his travels, asked thoughtful questions about their work and interests, even offered to help clear the table. But it was like watching someone perform for an audience that had already made up their mind not to be entertained. After Marcus left, promising to call me the next day, I lingered in the kitchen helping Mom with dishes. This was usually when she'd share her thoughts about my dates, offering either approval or gentle criticism. This time, she said nothing, just scrubbed plates with unusual intensity while Dad retreated to his office. "So?" I finally asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. Mom set down the plate she was washing and turned to face me. "He seems nice enough," she said. But her tone suggested that being nice wasn't nearly enough. Very articulate. The way she said articulate made my skin crawl, like she was surprised a black man could speak properly, like it was some kind of unexpected bonus feature. "That's it?" I pressed. "That's all you have to say about the man I'm dating?" Dad appeared in the doorway, clearly having heard the conversation. "April, sweetheart, we just want what's best for you. You have to think about your future, about compatibility, about whether someone really fits into your world. Your world. Not our world. Your world." As if Marcus couldn't possibly belong in the same spaces I occupied. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't about Marcus's character, his education, his success, or how he treated me. This was about the color of his skin, and they were too cowardly to say it outright. Instead, they'd hide behind coded language about compatibility and fitting in. That night, lying in bed in my childhood room, I stared at the ceiling and realized that my parents had just failed a test I hadn't even known I was giving them. And the worst part? I think they knew they'd failed too. But that was just the beginning of the nightmare that would tear our family apart forever. The next few weeks after that disastrous dinner felt like walking through a minefield. Every conversation with my parents became an exercise in reading between the lines, and what I found there made me sick. They never asked about Marcus again. Not once. It was like he'd never existed. Like that evening had been some strange dream we'd all had simultaneously. When I mentioned we were going to a concert together, Mom changed the subject to my cousin's engagement. When I shared that Marcus had gotten a promotion at work, Dad suddenly remembered urgent paperwork he needed to handle. It was the kind of deliberate, systematic ignoring that hurts worse than outright hostility because it pretends to be accidental. My sister Sarah noticed it too. During one of our weekly coffee dates, she leaned across the table and said, "They're being weird about Marcus, aren't they?" Sarah was 2 years younger than me, with the same blonde hair and blue eyes that made people immediately identify us as sisters. But where I'd always been the cautious one, the people pleaser who tried to keep everyone happy, Sarah was direct and unafraid of confrontation. She'd inherited Dad's analytical mind, but paired it with a moral compass that actually pointed north. "Weird how?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "They pretend he doesn't exist. Last Sunday at dinner, you mentioned going to that new restaurant downtown, and Mom immediately asked if you went alone. Like, who asks that? Obviously, you went with your boyfriend of 9 months. 9 months. Marcus and I had been together 9 months, and my parents acted like he was a phase I'd grow out of. They'd never once asked his opinion about anything, never included him in family event planning, never even mentioned his name unless I brought him up first. But everything changed the day Marcus proposed. He'd planned it perfectly. A picnic in Millennium Park, complete with my favorite foods and a playlist of songs that meant something to us. When he got down on one knee, I cried so hard I could barely choke out the word yes. The ring was gorgeous, a vintage Art Deco setting that somehow perfectly captured my style without me ever describing it to him. I called my parents from the park, still high on euphoria and champagne. "Mom, Dad, I have amazing news. Marcus proposed. We're engaged." The silence on the other end lasted so long I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, Dad's voice. "Well, that's sudden. Sudden. We'd been together 9 months. My cousin Jessica got engaged after 6 months and received champagne toasts and immediate party planning. But my engagement was sudden. We're very happy for you, sweetheart," Mom added, but her voice sounded like she was offering condolences rather than congratulations. "Have you thought about a timeline? Sometimes longer engagements are wise. Give people time to really think things through. Think things through." As if I'd made an impulsive decision rather than falling deeply in love with an incredible man who cherished me. The real confrontation came 3 days later, when Mom asked me to lunch, just the two of us. I should have known it was an ambush when she chose that expensive restaurant downtown, the one she used for important conversations. The kind of place where raised voices would be socially unacceptable. She waited until after we'd ordered to begin her prepared speech. "April, I need to say something, and I hope you'll listen with an open mind." Her hands were folded precisely on the white tablecloth, her voice steady and measured. "Your father and I are concerned about this engagement. Not because we don't want you to be happy, but because we love you too much to stay silent when we see potential problems." "What problems?" I asked, though my stomach was already clenching. "Compatibility issues, cultural differences, the challenges of navigating a relationship where you come from different backgrounds." Each pause was calculated, each word chosen to sound reasonable while delivering a devastating message. "You mean the challenge of him being black?" Mom's face flushed slightly. "That's not what I said. It's what you meant. April, don't put words in my mouth. I'm talking about practical considerations. The social dynamics you'll face, the difficulties your children might encounter, the way certain communities might not accept you as a couple. I'm trying to protect you from heartache." There it was, wrapped in maternal concern, delivered with loving intention, but ugly as hell underneath. My mother was telling me that my relationship was a mistake because society might not approve. She was asking me to prioritize other people's potential racism over my own happiness. "Marcus makes me happier than I've ever been in my life," I said quietly. "He's kind, successful, intelligent, and he loves me completely. What more could you possibly want for me?" "I want you to be realistic about what you're choosing," Mom replied. "This isn't just about the two of you. It's about your future, your place in society, the life you'll be able to build together." I stood up from the table, my appetite completely gone. "My place in society? Mom, it's 2024, not 1954. Sit down, April. Don't make a scene." But I was done caring about scenes. "You know what? I am making a scene. I'm making the scene where I choose the man I love over the approval of people who clearly don't know me at all." I left her sitting there, probably mortified by the attention from nearby tables. On the drive home, I called Marcus and told him everything. His response was so perfect it made me cry all over again. "Baby, I'm sorry they're putting you through this, but I want you to know that their opinion doesn't change anything for me. I love you, I want to marry you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of their daughter if that's what it takes. That's when I knew for certain that whatever happened with my parents, I was choosing correctly. Marcus wasn't just the man I wanted to marry. He was the person who helped me see my own worth. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. Have you ever experienced family members who couldn't support your happiness because of their own prejudices? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Planning a wedding should be one of the most exciting times in a woman's life. Instead, it became a masterclass in family abandonment that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Every decision I made was shadowed by the growing certainty that my parents had no intention of celebrating my marriage. The first sign came when I called to share our wedding date. Marcus and I had chosen a beautiful Saturday in late spring, booking a charming venue with gardens and enough space for about 100 guests. I'd spent weeks coordinating with caterers, photographers, and florists before calling my parents with the details. June 15th sounds lovely, Mom said when I told her. I'll need to check our calendar and get back to you about availability. Availability. For their own daughter's wedding. Like it was a distant cousin's graduation party they might or might not attend depending on what else was happening that weekend. Dad was even more direct when I asked about helping with costs. Well, April, wedding expenses can add up quickly. Have you considered something smaller, more intimate? Sometimes simple ceremonies are more meaningful than big productions. He'd never suggested simple ceremonies when we were discussing Jessica's wedding the year before. Her event had cost nearly $30,000, and Dad had proudly told everyone about the live band and chocolate fountain. But for my wedding, suddenly modest was meaningful. Sarah was furious when I told her about their response. Are you kidding me? They're actually going to boycott your wedding? They haven't said they're not coming, I replied. Though we both knew their enthusiasm level was somewhere below zero. They're just processing. April, they're not processing. They're hoping you'll change your mind if they withhold their support long enough. She was right, of course. My parents had always controlled situations through strategic withdrawal of approval. Throughout my childhood, disappointment was their weapon of choice. Bad grades meant silent dinners and canceled family activities until I improved. Wrong friend choices led to restricted privileges and passive-aggressive comments until I adjusted my social circle. But this time, their disapproval couldn't change the fundamental facts. I was an adult, financially independent, and madly in love with a man who treated me like gold. Their strategy would only work if I needed their approval more than I needed my own happiness. The wedding planning continued without them. Marcus's family, in contrast, embraced me immediately and completely. His mother, Patricia, helped me find my dress and insisted on hosting the bridal shower. His father, David, offered to walk me down the aisle if my father couldn't make it. His sister, Jasmine, became my maid of honor when it became clear that traditional family roles weren't going to work out. 3 weeks before the wedding, I made one final attempt to reach my parents. I drove to their house with printed invitations, venue photos, and a genuine hope that seeing the concrete details might soften their hearts. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes, dirt under her fingernails and surprise on her face. April, I wasn't expecting you. I brought the wedding invitations, I said, holding up the elegant cream envelopes we'd spent hours addressing. I wanted to deliver yours personally. She accepted the invitation but didn't open it. Instead, she gestured toward the living room where Dad was reading his newspaper in his usual chair. Robert, April's here with the wedding invitations. Dad looked up over his reading glasses, his expression carefully neutral. That's nice, sweetheart. Set it on the table with the other mail. With the other mail. My wedding invitation was being treated like a credit card offer or a grocery store circular. Something to be dealt with later if they felt like it. I sat down on the couch I'd grown up on, surrounded by family photos that suddenly felt like evidence of a life that no longer included me. I need to know if you're coming, I said directly. The caterer needs final numbers, and I need to know whether to save seats for you. Mom sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. April, we've talked about our concerns regarding this marriage. You know how we feel. How you feel about what exactly? Marcus's character, his education, his family, his treatment of me. Because from where I'm sitting, you've never given him a chance to prove anything except that he's not white enough for your comfort. Dad set down his newspaper with deliberate precision. That's unfair, and you know it. This has nothing to do with race and everything to do with practical compatibility. Then explain the practical incompatibilities. List them for me. Silence. Because there weren't any, and we all knew it. Marcus had a master's degree from Northwestern, ran his own successful business, owned his home, treated their daughter with respect and devotion, and had never been anything but polite and considerate in their presence. The only incompatibility was the one they refused to name. "We want you to be happy," Mom finally said. "But we also want you to be realistic about the challenges you'll face. The only challenge I'm facing right now is having parents who won't support their daughter's marriage to a wonderful man." I stood up to leave, and Dad called after me. "April, you know we love you. But sometimes love means being honest about difficult truths." I turned back to face him. "You're right, Dad. Sometimes love does mean being honest about difficult truths. So here's mine. You're choosing racism over your daughter's happiness, and you're too cowardly to admit it." Walking out of that house felt like stepping off a cliff, but sometimes you have to jump to discover you can actually fly. 2 weeks later, Sarah called with the news I'd been dreading but expecting. "They're not coming," she said without preamble. "Mom called this morning to ask if I thought you'd be upset if they missed the ceremony." Upset. As if their absence would be a minor disappointment rather than a devastating rejection of the most important day of my life. "Are you surprised?" I asked, though my voice was steadier than I felt. "No," Sarah said, "but I'm disgusted, and I want you to know that I'll be there, in the front row, cheering loudly enough for all three of us." That night, Marcus found me crying in our kitchen. Not the angry tears I'd expected, but something deeper. Grief for the parents I'd thought I had versus the ones who actually existed. "We don't need them there to make it real," he said, holding me close. "Our love doesn't require their permission or approval." He was right, but it still broke my heart that they were choosing hatred over love, prejudice over family, fear over joy. In 10 days, I'd be walking down the aisle without my father beside me, exchanging vows without my mother's tears of happiness. But I'd also be marrying the love of my life, surrounded by people who actually wanted us to succeed. Sometimes the family you choose matters more than the family you're born into. June 15th dawned bright and perfect, the kind of morning that makes you believe in fairy tales and happy endings. I woke up in the bridal suite at our venue, surrounded by flowers, champagne, and the excited chatter of my bridesmaids. Everything was exactly as I'd imagined it would be, except for the two most important empty chairs that would sit in the front row. Sarah arrived early with coffee and homemade muffins, her eyes bright with determination to make this the best day possible despite our parents' absence. She'd already picked up my dress from the seamstress and coordinated with the photographer about timeline adjustments now that we wouldn't have traditional family photos. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling into the chair next to my vanity mirror. "Like I'm about to marry the love of my life," I said, and meant it completely. "And like our parents are idiots for missing it. Their loss," Sarah said firmly. "Literally. They're choosing to miss one of the most beautiful love stories I've ever witnessed because they're too stuck in their backwards thinking to see what's right in front of them." The morning flew by in a whirlwind of hair, makeup, and photographs. Marcus's family had fully stepped into the roles my parents had abandoned. Patricia helped me into my dress, tears streaming down her face as she fastened each tiny button. David practiced his walk with me, offering his arm with such gentle dignity that I almost forgot the heartbreak of my father's absence. "You look absolutely radiant," Patricia whispered as we stood before the full-length mirror. "Marcus is the luckiest man alive." The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock in the garden pavilion, with cocktails to follow on the terrace and dinner in the main hall. Everything I'd planned was coming together flawlessly, from the string quartet playing our favorite songs to the arrangements of white roses and greenery that transformed the space into something magical. But as guests began arriving, I couldn't help scanning the entrance for any sign of my parents. Part of me still hoped they'd surprise me, show up at the last minute with apologies and explanations. Maybe they'd realized what they were throwing away. Maybe they'd come to their senses. Sarah must have noticed my distraction because she squeezed my hand and said, "Stop looking for them. They made their choice. Focus on everyone who did choose to be here." She was right. The garden was filling with people who loved us, who wanted to celebrate our marriage, who believed in our happiness. Marcus's business partners and college friends mingled with my work colleagues and childhood friends. Our chosen family was beautiful and complete without the two people who should have been there but weren't. At 3:45, David knocked on the bridal suite door. "Ready, beautiful?" I took one last look in the mirror, adjusting my grandmother's pearl necklace that I'd worn for something old. My dress was something new, Sarah's bracelet was something borrowed, and my blue shoes were hidden beneath layers of silk and tulle. Everything was perfect except for the parents-shaped hole in my heart. "Ready," I said, and meant it. The processional music began, and Sarah walked down the aisle first, radiant in her sage green dress, and carrying a bouquet of white peonies. Then came Jasmine and my other bridesmaids, each one glowing with joy for our special day. When the bridal march started and I appeared at the end of the aisle on David's arm, I saw Marcus's face light up with such pure love that everything else fell away. The empty chairs, the family drama, the months of heartache, none of it mattered compared to the man waiting for me at the altar. David kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Marcus's, whispering, "Take care of our girl." "Always," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. The ceremony itself was everything I'd dreamed of. Our officiant spoke about love conquering all obstacles, about chosen family being just as powerful as blood family, about the courage it takes to build something beautiful in a world that doesn't always support it. When Marcus and I exchanged the vows we'd written ourselves, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "April," Marcus said, his hands holding mine steady, "you are my anchor, my adventure, my home. You've shown me that love isn't just a feeling, but a choice we make every day. I choose you today and every day for the rest of our lives, no matter what challenges we face or who tries to tear us apart." My own vows came from the deepest part of my heart. "Marcus, you've taught me that I deserve to be loved completely and unconditionally. You've shown me what it means to be someone's priority, not their compromise. I promise to stand by you, to fight for us, and to never let anyone make me feel ashamed of this incredible love we've built together." When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the garden erupted in cheers and applause. Marcus kissed me like we were the only two people in the world, and for that moment, we were. The reception was magical. Our first dance was to "At Last" by Etta James, and as Marcus spun me around the dance floor, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Sarah's maid of honor speech had everyone laughing and crying, especially when she said, "Some people spend their whole lives looking for the kind of love April and Marcus have found, and some people are too blind to recognize it when it's right in front of them." Around 9 o'clock, as the party was in full swing, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. "Hope you had a lovely day." A lovely day. Like I'd gone to a garden party instead of getting married. I showed the message to Sarah, who rolled her eyes and said, "Don't even respond to that nonsense." But the message did something unexpected. Instead of hurting me, it made me realize how completely I'd moved beyond needing their approval. I was married to an amazing man, surrounded by people who loved us, dancing in a garden full of flowers and laughter. Their absence had become irrelevant to my happiness. Later that night, in our honeymoon suite, Marcus and I sat on the balcony overlooking the garden where we'd just promised our lives to each other. "Any regrets?" he asked, though he was smiling as he said it. "Only one," I said, snuggling closer to him. "I regret waiting so long to realize that their opinion doesn't matter. Today was perfect, Marcus. Absolutely perfect." And it was. Our wedding day had been everything I'd wanted it to be, even without the people who should have been there. Sometimes the most beautiful celebrations happen when you stop waiting for permission to be happy. But I had no idea that the real test of our marriage was still coming. The first few months of married life were blissful in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus and I settled into our routine as husband and wife with the kind of easy contentment that made me understand why people talked about finding their person. We were partners in everything from deciding on furniture for our home, to planning weekend adventures, to supporting each other through work stress. But underneath the happiness was a constant, low-level heartache about my parents' continued silence. They hadn't called after the wedding, hadn't sent a card, hadn't acknowledged that their daughter had gotten married at all. It was like I'd simply ceased to exist the moment I chose Marcus over their approval. Sarah tried to fill the gap, calling regularly and stopping by with updates about family drama I was no longer included in. Through her, I learned that Mom had told the extended family that I'd eloped and that they hadn't been invited. Not technically a lie, but certainly a creative interpretation of events designed to save face. "Aunt Karen asked why you eloped," Sarah reported during one of our coffee dates. "She seemed confused about why you wouldn't want a big family wedding." "What did Mom say?" "That young people today prefer intimate ceremonies." Sarah's expression made it clear what she thought of that explanation. "She's rewriting history to make it sound like your choice instead of theirs." The isolation was harder than I'd expected. I'd grown up as part of a tight family unit, despite our dysfunction, and suddenly being cut off from all family gatherings, holiday planning, and casual communication felt like losing a limb. Marcus's family tried to fill the void, including me in everything from Sunday dinners to birthday celebrations. But it wasn't quite the same as the family you'd known your whole life. Work became my refuge. I'd been promoted to senior marketing coordinator at my company, which meant longer hours but also more interesting projects and better pay. The distraction was welcome, and my colleagues became a kind of chosen family that made the days easier. Marcus was incredibly patient with my adjustment process. He never pushed me to talk about my parents when I wasn't ready, never suggested I should try harder to reconcile, never made me feel guilty for the sadness that sometimes crept in during quiet moments. He just loved me through it, which somehow made the healing possible. Your worth isn't determined by their ability to see it, he'd remind me when I had bad days. Some people are so blinded by their own prejudices that they can't recognize treasure when it's right in front of them. 3 months after our wedding, everything changed because of a car. Marcus had been working incredibly hard on expanding his business. What I knew about his work was that he owned a small chain of electronics stores that specialized in high-end home theater systems. He'd started with one location 5 years earlier, and had grown it into 3 stores with plans for more. The business was doing well, but I had no idea just how well until my 29th birthday. I woke up that morning to breakfast in bed and a stack of presents wrapped in silver paper. Marcus was grinning like he had a secret, practically bouncing with excitement as I opened each gift. Beautiful jewelry, a designer handbag I'd admired, a spa day package, everything was thoughtful and generous. "These are too much," I protested, though I was touched by his attention to detail. "Not even close to too much," he said, kissing my forehead. "But there's one more thing. Get dressed, we're going for a drive." An hour later, we pulled into the parking lot of a luxury car dealership. I looked around in confusion, wondering if we were shopping for him or just browsing for fun. "Marcus, what are we doing here?" He parked and turned to me with that same excited grin. "Happy birthday, baby." That's when I saw it. Sitting in the front row of the lot, with a giant red bow on the roof, was a pristine white Porsche 911. Not just any car, the exact car I'd pointed out in a magazine months earlier and joked about wanting someday. "You did not buy me a Porsche," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I absolutely did buy you a Porsche," he replied, dangling the keys in front of me. "You deserve beautiful things, April, and I love being able to give them to you." I burst into tears right there in the parking lot, not just because of the car, though it was gorgeous and completely unexpected, but because of what it represented. Marcus had listened when I'd made an offhand comment about a dream car. He'd remembered, planned, and made it happen because he wanted to see me happy. We spent the rest of the day driving through the countryside with the top down, music playing, both of us laughing at the sheer luxury of it all. I felt like a princess in a fairy tale, except this was real life and this was my husband making my dreams come true. That evening, still high on the excitement of the day, I posted a photo on Instagram. Just me leaning against the Porsche in our driveway with the caption, "Best birthday ever," feeling so grateful for this amazing life and the incredible man who makes it all possible. Blessed, shack your birthday, shack your dream car. I tagged Marcus and added some car-related hashtags, then forgot about it as we headed inside for dinner. Social media posts were casual for me, just a way to share happy moments with friends and distant relatives who followed my account. I had no idea that single photo would destroy the fragile peace I'd built around my parents' absence and force a confrontation I wasn't prepared for. But sometimes the universe has a way of making sure unfinished business gets finished, whether you're ready or not. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. My phone started ringing at 7:30 the next morning. I was still in my pajamas, making coffee and replaying memories from my perfect birthday, when Mom's name appeared on my screen. We hadn't spoken in over 3 months, not since the wedding invitation conversation, so seeing her contact information was jarring. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail, to maintain the boundary I'd established when they chose not to attend my wedding. But curiosity won out, and I swiped to accept the call. "April." Mom's voice was sharp, tense in a way that immediately put me on guard. "We need to talk." No hello, no happy belated birthday, no acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken since I'd gotten married. Just straight into whatever crisis had prompted her to break months of silence. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I said, keeping my voice deliberately calm. "Don't play games with me, young lady. I saw your Instagram post. Where is all this money coming from?" The question hit me like a slap. Not congratulations on the beautiful car, not happiness that I was clearly thriving, not curiosity about how my new marriage was going. Just immediate suspicion about money and a tone that suggested I owed her an explanation. "What money?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "The Porsche, April. The designer clothes in your other recent posts. The expensive restaurants you've been posting about. Where is Marcus getting this kind of money?" Her voice was getting higher, more accusatory with each word. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't concern for my well-being or curiosity about my happiness. This was interrogation, suspicion, and something that sounded almost like accusation. Marcus works hard and his business is successful, I said carefully. Why are you asking? April, I need you to think about this logically. A few months ago, you were dating someone who owned a small electronics store. Now suddenly there are Porsches and expensive jewelry. People don't just become wealthy overnight unless something questionable is happening. Questionable. The word hung in the air like poison. My mother was suggesting that my husband was involved in something illegal, not wondering about a promotion, an inheritance, or business success. Her first assumption was criminal activity. Mom, you don't know anything about Marcus's business or finances because you've never bothered to ask. You met him once, wrote him off immediately, and then refused to attend our wedding. You don't get to call me now and make accusations. I'm not making accusations. I'm expressing legitimate concerns. This kind of sudden wealth raises red flags, and I'm worried about what you've gotten yourself into. Red flags. Gotten myself into. Like I was some naive child who'd been tricked by a criminal instead of a grown woman who'd married a successful businessman. We're having a family meeting, Mom continued, her voice taking on the authoritative tone she'd used when I was in trouble as a child. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. You and Marcus need to be there so we can get to the bottom of this situation. A family meeting. They'd ignored my wedding, refused to acknowledge my marriage, and treated me like I'd died for 3 months. But now they wanted a family meeting because they'd seen evidence of prosperity they couldn't explain. Actually, Mom, we won't be attending any family meetings. You forfeited the right to comment on my life choices when you chose not to be part of my life. April Thompson Johnson. This is bigger than whatever grudge you're holding about the wedding. If Marcus is involved in illegal activities, you could be in real danger. As your parents, we have a responsibility to protect you. Thompson Johnson. She'd used my full married name like it left a bad taste in her mouth. And there it was again, the assumption that Marcus must be involved in something illegal because a black man couldn't possibly earn an expensive car legitimately. The only danger I'm in is from racist parents who can't accept that their daughter married someone who doesn't fit their narrow worldview. I said, my voice shaking with anger. And for the record, it's April Johnson now. I took my husband's name. Don't you dare play the race card with me, young lady. This has nothing to do with race and everything to do with protecting our daughter from potential criminals. You know what, Mom? You're right. You should protect your daughter from criminals. You should start by looking in the mirror and examining your own moral crimes. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline and fury. Marcus found me in the kitchen 10 minutes later, still staring at my phone in disbelief. What's wrong? He asked immediately, wrapping his arms around me. I told him everything, the call, the accusations, the family meeting demand. I watched his face carefully, looking for hurt or anger, but what I saw was something sadder. Resignation. Like he'd been expecting this reaction all along. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry they're putting you through this because of me. Don't you dare apologize, I said fiercely. You have nothing to be sorry for. They're the ones who should be apologizing for being bigoted, small-minded people who can't see what an incredible man their daughter married. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Family meeting tomorrow, 3 p.m. This isn't optional. We need answers about the source of this sudden wealth. I screenshotted the message and showed it to Marcus. What do you want to do? He asked. I thought about it for a long moment. We could ignore them, continue with our happy life, pretend they didn't exist just like they'd pretended we didn't exist. Or we could go to their meeting and finally end this charade once and for all. Let's go, I said finally. I said, let's go show them exactly who they've been dismissing all this time. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You sure about that? I looked at him, my brilliant, successful, generous husband, who'd been nothing but patient with my family's racism, and felt a surge of protective fury that surprised me with its intensity. I'm absolutely sure. It's time they learned who Marcus Johnson really is. I had no idea that our arrival at their house the next day would change everything forever. But sometimes the truth has a way of exploding myths in the most spectacular way possible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would finally force my parents to face the reality of their prejudices. And I was ready for war. April's story, chapters 7 to 12. The next day at 2:45, Marcus and I pulled into my parents' driveway in the white Porsche that had caused all this drama. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a designer dress Marcus had bought me for our anniversary, paired with the diamond earrings he'd given me for my birthday. If they wanted to see wealth, I'd show them wealth. You ready for this? Marcus asked, adjusting his suit jacket. He looked every inch the successful businessman he was, confident and composed despite knowing he was walking into hostile territory. I've been ready for this conversation my entire life, I replied, checking my lipstick in the visor mirror. They want to know where the money comes from? Today they find out. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more family drama that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. We walked up the familiar path to the front door, our footsteps echoing on the brick walkway I'd skipped along as a child. Mom answered before we could ring the bell, like she'd been watching from the window. Her eyes immediately went to the Porsche in the driveway, then to my outfit, then to Marcus with undisguised suspicion. April, Marcus. Her greeting was crisp, formal, like we were business associates rather than family. Come in. Your father's waiting in the living room. The house looked exactly the same as always, pristine, coordinated, and cold as a museum. Dad was standing by the fireplace in his weekend casual uniform of khakis and a polo shirt, but his posture was rigid with tension. Sarah was perched on the edge of the sofa, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. I didn't know you'd be here, I said to Sarah, giving her a quick hug. They insisted, she whispered back. Said this concerned the whole family. Marcus and I sat on the love seat across from Dad's chair, presenting a united front. The seating arrangement felt deliberately confrontational, them versus us, parents versus children, accusers versus accused. Dad cleared his throat and launched into what was obviously a prepared speech. April, we asked you here today because we're concerned about recent developments in your life. The expensive car, the luxury items, the lifestyle changes we've observed through social media. Social media. They'd been monitoring my Instagram like surveillance officers, cataloging evidence of prosperity they couldn't explain. We're concerned, Mom added, settling into her chair with the same expression she'd worn during my teenage lectures about responsibility and consequences, about the source of this sudden wealth and what it might mean for your safety and reputation. Our safety and reputation, I corrected, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. Let's be honest about whose reputation you're actually worried about. Dad's face flushed slightly. This isn't about us. April, this is about making sure you're not involved in anything that could put you in legal jeopardy. Legal jeopardy. There it was again, the assumption that Marcus must be a criminal because successful black businessmen apparently didn't exist in their worldview. What exactly are you suggesting? Marcus asked. His voice calm but with an edge that made me proud. He wasn't cowering or defending himself desperately. He was asking them to voice their accusations directly. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. We're not suggesting anything specific, Mom said carefully. We're asking for transparency about your business operations and income sources. My business operations, Marcus repeated, leaning back slightly. You want to know about my business operations? It's not unreasonable, Dad said, his financial advisor persona coming out. Young men don't typically have the kind of disposable income that allows for Porsche purchases unless there's something unusual about their revenue streams. Revenue streams. He was talking about my husband like a suspicious investment opportunity rather than their daughter's spouse. You're right, Marcus said, and I shot him a surprised look. It's not typical for young men to have that kind of disposable income. Most people my age are still climbing the ladder, building their careers, establishing themselves. Mom looked vindicated, like he'd just confessed to something incriminating. But then again, Marcus continued, most people my age don't own a business that's been featured in Forbes under 40 for innovative retail strategies. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Mom's face went completely blank, like she was processing information that didn't compute. Dad's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Forbes? Sarah asked, her voice small with surprise. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a magazine. Not just any magazine, the latest issue of Forbes with a glossy cover featuring young entrepreneurs. He set it on the coffee table between us, open to a 2-page spread with his professional headshot, and the headline, Retail Revolution, How Marcus Johnson Built a Multi-Million-Dollar Electronics Empire. This month's issue, he said conversationally. The article details how I started with one store 5 years ago and built it into a chain of 12 locations across 3 states, with projected revenues of $48 million this year. I stared at the magazine, then at my husband, then back at the magazine. $48 million. Marcus had never told me the exact figures of his success, just that business was good and growing. I'd known he was successful, but I had no idea he was featured in Forbes successful. The article also mentions my plans for national expansion and the venture capital partnership I signed last month to fund the next phase of growth, Marcus continued, his voice still calm but with a satisfaction that made me want to cheer. It's all very transparent and documented if you'd like to verify the information. Mom picked up the magazine with trembling hands, staring at Marcus's photo like she was seeing him for the first time. Dad leaned over to read the article, his face cycling through expressions of shock, embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Dad started, then stopped. The electronics stores are yours? All of them? All 12, with 3 more opening this fall, Marcus confirmed. Johnson Electronics. You might have seen our commercials during football season. Sarah burst out laughing not from humor, but from pure nervous energy. Oh my God. April, do you know what this means? I was still processing the magnitude of what I'd just learned. My husband wasn't just successful, he was Forbes cover successful. He was millionaire successful. He was everything my parents claimed to value in terms of achievement and status, but they'd been too blinded by racism to see it. What this means, I said slowly, finding my voice, is that my parents spent 3 months assuming my husband was a criminal instead of asking a single question about who he actually is. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, because that's exactly what had happened, and we all knew it. Mom set down the magazine carefully, like it might explode. We didn't know, she said weakly. You didn't want to know, I corrected. You met him once, decided he wasn't good enough for your daughter, and never bothered to find out anything real about him. Not his education, not his career, not his character, nothing. Dad was still staring at the Forbes article like it was written in a foreign language. April, we never meant to suggest— Yes, you did, I interrupted. You absolutely meant to suggest that Marcus was involved in something illegal. You called me yesterday morning convinced my husband was a criminal because you can't imagine a black man earning success legitimately. The words landed like physical blows. Mom flinched visibly, and Dad's face went white, then red. Sarah was watching the scene unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination. That's not fair, Mom protested. We were concerned about sudden changes. Were you concerned about sudden changes when Jessica's fiancé showed up with a BMW last year? Did you demand a family meeting to investigate his revenue streams? Silence. Because of course they hadn't. Jessica's fiancé was white, so his success was automatically legitimate in their minds. Marcus stood up, straightening his jacket. I think we've accomplished what we came here to do, he said quietly. April, are you ready to go? I looked around the living room where I'd grown up, at the parents who'd raised me but apparently didn't know me at all, at the sister who looked ashamed and angry and sad all at once. More than ready, I said, standing to join my husband. But as we headed toward the door, Mom's voice stopped us. Wait, please. We need to talk about this. We need to fix this. I turned back to see both my parents looking smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of their own prejudices finally exposed. Some things can't be fixed, Mom. Some damage is permanent. But even as I said it, I could see the wheels turning in their heads, and something told me this conversation was far from over. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what had just happened. I kept stealing glances at Marcus, seeing him with new eyes. Not just my loving husband, but a business mogul who'd been featured in Forbes. The disconnect between who I'd known him to be and the full scope of his success was staggering. Why didn't you tell me? I finally asked as we pulled into our driveway. About Forbes? About the 48 million? About how huge your business really is? Marcus turned off the engine and sat back in his seat, because I didn't want it to change anything between us. When we met, you fell in love with me as a guy who owned an electronics store and treated you well. I didn't want you to start seeing dollar signs instead of the person. But I'm your wife. Shouldn't I know these things? You know everything that matters, he said, reaching for my hand. You know I work hard. You know I'm successful enough to take care of us. You know I love spoiling you. The exact numbers never seemed important until today. He was right, of course. I'd never needed to know his net worth to know his worth as a person. But seeing my parents' faces when confronted with evidence of his success had been satisfying in a way I wasn't entirely proud of. Did you see Mom's expression when you showed her the magazine? I asked, and Marcus chuckled, like she'd been slapped with a cold fish. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. My phone started buzzing before we'd even gotten inside the house. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Dad, and a string of text messages that ranged from apologetic to demanding. Mom, April, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Dad, can we please have a conversation without accusations? Mom, we want to apologize and start over. Dad, bring Marcus for dinner Sunday. We'll do this right. I showed the messages to Marcus, who shook his head in disbelief. 24 hours ago, they thought I was a criminal. Now they want to have dinner and start over? Because now they know you're rich, I said, the truth bitter in my mouth. Now they want to be part of our success story instead of protecting me from it. Over the next few days, the phone calls and messages intensified. My parents had apparently done their own research on Marcus's business empire, probably Googling every article and interview they could find. Their tune had changed completely from suspicion to enthusiasm, from protection to participation. Mom left a voicemail that made my skin crawl. April, sweetheart, I found that wonderful article about Marcus in Business Week from last year. I had no idea about his innovative approaches to retail technology. We'd love to hear more about his expansion plans over dinner this weekend. Innovative approaches to retail technology. 3 days earlier, she'd been convinced he was a drug dealer. Now she was using business jargon and wanting to discuss expansion plans. Dad's approach was more direct. April, I owe Marcus an apology. I'd like to take him to lunch and discuss some investment opportunities that might benefit his business growth. Investment opportunities. My father, who'd refused to attend our wedding, now wanted to become Marcus's business partner. Sarah called on Thursday evening, her voice tight with frustration. You need to know what they're saying now. It's making me sick. What do you mean? They're rewriting history. Again, now they're telling people they were initially concerned about Marcus because they wanted to make sure he was serious about you, not because of any other reasons. They're acting like they did some kind of due diligence that proved his worthiness. Due diligence. They were spinning their racism as responsible parenting, their assumptions as careful vetting. Mom actually said to Mrs. Peterson yesterday that she's proud of how well you chose, Sarah continued. She said Marcus is exactly the kind of successful, ambitious man she always hoped you'd marry. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They'd gone from boycotting our wedding to being proud of my choice, all because a magazine had validated what they'd been too prejudiced to see for themselves. There's more, Sarah said, her voice dropping. They want to throw you guys a belated wedding reception. Mom's already talking about guest lists and venues. She wants to properly celebrate your marriage now that they understand the situation better. A belated wedding reception. For the marriage they'd refused to attend because they disapproved of my husband. Now that they knew he was wealthy, suddenly our love story was worth celebrating. Are you going to let them? Sarah asked. I looked across the room at Marcus, who was reading on the couch, completely unaware of the conversation that was about to change everything. He looked peaceful, content, settled in the life we'd built together without my parents' approval or involvement. I don't know, I said honestly. Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell. But part of me wonders if this is the chance to finally have the family relationship I always wanted. April, Sarah said gently, they're not apologizing because they realize they were wrong about Marcus as a person. They're apologizing because they realize they were wrong about his bank account. That's not the same thing. She was absolutely right. Their sudden change of heart wasn't about recognizing Marcus's character, intelligence, or how well he treated me. It was about recognizing his financial success and wanting access to it. That night, Marcus and I talked until almost midnight about what to do. He was characteristically generous in his assessment of my parents' turnaround. Maybe this is their way of trying to make amends, he suggested. Maybe they genuinely realize they made a mistake and want to fix it. Or maybe they see dollar signs and want to be included in our success now that they know it exists. I countered. Does their motivation matter if the result is better? Marcus asked. If they treat us with respect going forward, does it matter whether it's because they've grown as people or because they've learned I'm wealthy? It was a fair question, but something about accepting their sudden reversal felt like betraying the months of pain they'd caused us. It felt like allowing them to rewrite history without acknowledging the damage they'd done. Let's test it, I said finally. Let's see how sincere this transformation really is. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I was about to find out just how deep my parents' newfound acceptance really went, and whether their apologies would survive learning some uncomfortable truths about their own behavior. But first, I needed to know exactly what they'd been saying about us behind our backs during those months of silence. Sunday dinner at my parents' house felt like stepping into an alternate universe. The same dining room where Marcus had been received with icy politeness 6 months earlier was now decorated with fresh flowers and set with Mom's finest china. Dad had even opened a bottle of wine that I knew he'd been saving for special occasions. Marcus, welcome, Dad said, extending his hand with the kind of warm smile I hadn't seen him give my husband before. I'm so glad you could join us. Thank you for having us, Marcus replied diplomatically, though I could see the wariness in his eyes. He wasn't buying the sudden personality change any more than I was. Mom had outdone herself with the meal roast beef with all the traditional sides, plus Marcus's favorite dessert that she'd somehow remembered from our disastrous first dinner. Everything was designed to impress, to show that she'd been paying attention after all. Marcus, I have to tell you how impressed we are with what you've built, Mom said as she carved the roast. 12 stores, and plans for national expansion. It's truly remarkable for someone so young. Someone so young. Not someone so talented or hardworking or innovative. Young. Like his success was surprising given his age rather than his race. I've been lucky, Marcus said modestly. Right place, right time, good team. Nonsense, Dad interjected. I've been reading about your business model. The integration of online and brick-and-mortar retail. The customer experience focus. The employee ownership program. That's not luck, that's vision. I watched this performance with a mixture of amazement and disgust. Dad was using the same enthusiastic tone he'd used when describing Marcus's business that he typically reserved for discussing stock market gains or golf scores. Everything was about metrics and achievements now. Nothing about character or how Marcus treated his daughter. We owe you both an apology, Mom said suddenly, setting down her fork and looking directly at us. We handled your relationship poorly from the beginning. We let our concerns cloud our judgment about who Marcus really is. Concerns. Still not calling it what it was. We're just protective of April, Dad added. Maybe overly so. When we see our daughter with someone new, we want to make sure they're worthy of her. Worthy. Based on what criteria? Because Marcus had been worthy from day one, but they'd been too blinded by prejudice to see it. What exactly were your concerns? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Because I think it's important to be specific about what we're apologizing for. My parents exchanged one of their meaningful looks. Well, Mom said carefully, we didn't know about Marcus's professional success at first. We just saw someone who seemed different from the men you'd dated before. Different. Another coded word. Different how? I pressed. You know, Dad said, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Different background, different experiences. We worried about compatibility. Marcus set down his wine glass and leaned forward slightly. Mr. Thompson, I'd like to understand what made you think we were incompatible. Because from my perspective, April and I have built a very compatible life together. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mom and Dad both looked like they'd rather be anywhere else in the world. It wasn't personal, Mom said finally. We just know that relationships can be challenging when people come from very different worlds. What different worlds? I asked. Marcus grew up in Illinois, just like me. He went to Northwestern, which is a better school than where I went. He's successful, kind, educated, and treats me like a princess. What world is he from that's so different from mine? Silence. Because the only world they saw him as coming from was a black world, which in their minds was automatically incompatible with their white suburban daughter. Marcus saved them from having to answer. I think what's important is that we're here now, having this conversation. People can change their minds when they get new information. Ever the diplomat, giving them an out they didn't deserve. But I wasn't feeling diplomatic. But what if you hadn't been featured in Forbes? I asked. What if your business was smaller, or you worked for someone else? Or you were just a regular guy who loved me? Would we be having this dinner then? Mom's face flushed. April, that's not fair. Isn't it? Because I'm pretty sure that if Marcus owned one electronics store instead of 12, we'd still be getting the silent treatment. Your acceptance seems pretty directly correlated to his net worth. Dad cleared his throat. Success indicates character traits we value. Ambition, intelligence, determination. Marcus had those traits 6 months ago, too. The only thing that's changed is your knowledge of his bank account. The dinner continued with increasingly strained conversation. My parents kept trying to steer things toward business topics, asking Marcus about expansion plans and market strategies. They were treating him like a celebrity now instead of their daughter's husband, which somehow felt almost as dehumanizing as their previous dismissal. After dinner, while Mom showed Marcus her garden, Dad pulled me aside in the kitchen. I know you're angry, he said quietly. And maybe you have a right to be. But can't you just be happy that we're trying to make things right? Are you, though? Making things right? Because apologizing for being wrong about Marcus's bank account isn't the same as apologizing for being racist. Dad's face went rigid. We are not racist. April, we've never said anything racist. You didn't have to say it directly, Dad. It was in everything you didn't say. Every assumption you made, every coded word you used. You met a black man and immediately assumed he wasn't good enough for your daughter. That's not what happened. Then explain to me what did happen. Explain why you were so concerned about compatibility with someone you'd met once. Explain why your first assumption about his success was criminal activity. Explain it without mentioning race. He couldn't, of course, because race was the only explanation that made sense of their behavior. As we drove home that evening, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "They're trying." "Are they, though? Or are they just trying to position themselves to benefit from your success?" "Maybe both," he said. "Maybe that's the best we can hope for right now." I wanted to believe that was enough. I wanted to accept their conditional acceptance and move forward with some version of a family relationship. But something deep in my gut told me this was just another performance. Another way for them to control the narrative without actually confronting their own prejudices. "I need to know what they really think," I told Marcus. "Not what they're willing to say to our faces now that they know you're successful, but what they really believe about us. How are you going to find that out?" I thought about Sarah, about her discomfort during dinner, about the things she'd hinted at but hadn't said directly. I'm going to ask someone who's been listening to their real opinions all along. The conversation I was about to have with my sister would expose the ugly truth behind my parents' sudden change of heart, and it would force me to make a decision about whether some bridges are too damaged to ever be truly repaired. I met Sarah for coffee the next afternoon at our usual spot, a little cafe downtown that felt neutral and safe for difficult conversations. She arrived looking troubled, like she'd been dreading this meeting but knew it was necessary. "You want to know what they've really been saying," she said before I could even ask. It wasn't a question. "I need to know," I confirmed, "because yesterday felt like a performance, and I can't build a relationship on lies." Sarah stirred her latte slowly, clearly choosing her words carefully. "April, you're not going to like what I have to tell you. I figured, but I need to hear it anyway." She took a deep breath and began. "The night after your wedding, when you and Marcus were on your honeymoon, Mom called me crying. Not because she felt bad about missing your wedding, but because she was angry that you'd gone through with it." My stomach clenched, but I nodded for her to continue. She said, and I quote, "I can't believe April threw her life away for that man. When I pointed out that you looked incredibly happy, she said, 'Happiness fades, but this decision will follow her forever.'" The words hit like physical blows. While I'd been dancing at my reception, celebrating the best day of my life, my mother had been mourning it like a funeral. "Dad wasn't much better," Sarah continued. "He kept talking about how you'd limited your options and how these relationships never last anyway. When I asked what he meant by these relationships, he said interracial couples have too many obstacles to overcome." They said all this to you? To me? To Aunt Karen? To anyone who would listen? They positioned themselves as the concerned parents whose daughter had made a regrettable choice they couldn't support. Sarah's voice was tight with anger. "They told people they'd tried to talk sense into you, but that you were too stubborn to listen." I felt sick. While I'd been building a beautiful marriage, they'd been systematically destroying my reputation with the extended family, painting me as a foolish girl who'd made a mistake they'd tried to prevent. "There's more," Sarah said reluctantly. "When you posted about your promotion at work, Mom said it was probably affirmative action helping you because of your husband. When you posted photos from your anniversary dinner, she said Marcus was just showing off trying to prove something. Every happy moment I'd shared, every milestone I'd celebrated, had been twisted into something negative in their minds. They couldn't accept that my life was genuinely good, so they invented explanations that preserved their narrative of my poor choices." "And when you posted the Porsche picture?" Sarah's face darkened. "That's when it got really ugly. Dad immediately said no legitimate business could afford that kind of expense for personal use. Mom said you were either being foolish with money or Marcus was involved in something illegal." "What did you say?" I told them they were being ridiculous and racist. That got me a lecture about not understanding the real world and being naive about the kinds of problems you were creating for yourself. Problems I was creating for myself by marrying a successful black man. The victim blaming was breathtaking in its cruelty. "But Sarah, what are they saying now? Since the Forbes revelation?" Sarah's expression shifted to something like disgust. "Now they're telling everyone they always knew Marcus was special. Mom told Mrs. Chen yesterday that she could tell from the first time she met him that he was going places. She said they were just being careful parents making sure he was serious about their daughter. The rewriting of history was complete. They'd gone from believing I'd ruined my life to claiming they'd recognized Marcus's potential all along. Every cruel comment, every assumption, every month of silence had been erased and replaced with a fiction that made them look wise rather than bigoted. "Are they sorry?" I asked. "Do they realize how much they hurt us?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I think they're sorry they missed out on the opportunity to be associated with Marcus's success. But sorry for hurting you? Sorry for the racist assumptions they made? I don't think they even see it that way." "What do you mean?" I mean, they think they were justified in being cautious, and now they've been proven wrong about Marcus's financial status, but not about their methods. They think they did due diligence as parents and just got incomplete information. Due diligence. Like investigating a black man's worthiness was a reasonable parental responsibility. There's something else, Sarah said, looking even more uncomfortable. Something I probably should have told you sooner. My heart started racing. What? Last month, before the Forbes article, I heard Mom on the phone with Aunt Karen. She was talking about your marriage, and she said, Sarah paused, clearly struggling with whether to continue. Just tell me. She said she was waiting for you to come to your senses and that when your marriage failed, she'd be there to help you rebuild your life properly. She had it all planned out how she'd support you through the divorce, help you find someone more suitable, make sure you learned from your mistakes. The betrayal was so complete it took my breath away. My mother hadn't just disapproved of my marriage, she'd been actively hoping for its failure. She'd been waiting for me to suffer so she could swoop in and prove her point about my poor judgment. I'm sorry, Sarah said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I know that's awful to hear, but you asked for the truth. I sat there processing the magnitude of what I'd learned. My parents' sudden acceptance wasn't growth or enlightenment. It was opportunism. They'd realized they'd been wrong about Marcus's bank account and were scrambling to position themselves to benefit from their mistake. But their fundamental views about interracial relationships, about my judgment, about my worth, none of that had changed. What are you going to do? Sarah asked. I thought about the dinner we'd shared the night before, about Mom's carefully prepared meal and Dad's business enthusiasm, about the wedding reception they wanted to throw and the investment opportunities they wanted to discuss. All of it built on a foundation of lies and self-interest. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, I said finally. Sarah looked worried. April, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't worry, I assured her. I'm not going to cause a scene or embarrass anyone publicly. I'm just going to be honest about what kind of relationship I'm willing to have with people who spent months hoping my marriage would fail. That evening, I told Marcus everything Sarah had shared. I watched his face carefully as I repeated their cruel comments and their hopes for our divorce. To his credit, he didn't get angry or defensive. He just looked sad. I'm sorry they put you through that, he said when I finished. And I'm sorry they put Sarah in the position of hearing all that ugliness. Are you upset about what they said about you? Marcus considered the question. I'm disappointed, but not surprised. I've dealt with assumptions like that my whole life. What makes me angry is how they treated you. You deserved better from your parents. I did deserve better. And I'm not going to pretend I didn't just because they've changed their tune now that they know you're successful. The next morning, I called my parents and asked them to lunch. Just the three of us, I said. No Marcus, no Sarah, no distractions. It was time for a conversation about the real state of our relationship. They probably thought I was finally ready to accept their apologies and move forward. They had no idea I was preparing to set boundaries they wouldn't like at all. We met at the same upscale restaurant where Mom had first confronted me about my engagement. And the irony wasn't lost on me. She'd chosen this place before to deliver devastating news while maintaining social respectability. Now I was returning the favor. Mom and Dad arrived dressed like they were attending a celebration, both beaming with the kind of satisfaction that made my skin crawl. They thought this lunch was my surrender, my acceptance of their conditional approval, my agreement to pretend the past year hadn't happened. April, sweetheart, Mom said, leaning in for an air kiss. You look wonderful. Marriage and success suit you. Marriage and success. Like they were separate, unrelated things rather than part of the same beautiful life I'd built with Marcus. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Dad added, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man who thought he'd won something. We have so much to discuss about the future. Yes, we do, I agreed, my voice calm and measured. I want to be very clear about what our relationship looks like going forward. They exchanged pleased glances, probably expecting me to outline plans for family dinners and holiday celebrations, maybe discuss the wedding reception they wanted to throw. First, I said, folding my hands on the white tablecloth, I need you both to understand that I know exactly what you've been saying about me and Marcus for the past year. Mom's smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean, I know about your conversations with Aunt Karen about hoping my marriage would fail. I know about your comments that I threw my life away and would need to rebuild properly after my inevitable divorce. I know about every cruel assumption you made and every racist comment you thought I'd never hear. The color drained from both their faces. Dad started to speak, but I held up my hand to stop him. I know you told people you were doing parental due diligence instead of admitting you made assumptions based on race. I know you blamed affirmative action for my promotion and suspicious business practices for Marcus's success. I know everything, and I'm not interested in hearing denials or explanations. Mom found her voice first. April, if someone told you we said those things, they misunderstood our meaning. Sarah didn't misunderstand anything. She heard your exact words, your exact tone, your exact intentions. You weren't being cautious parents. You were being racist parents. And now that you've discovered Marcus is wealthy, you want to pretend none of that happened. That's not fair, Dad protested. People can change their minds when they get new information. You didn't get new information about Marcus's character, Dad. You got new information about his bank account. There's a difference. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table between us. I recorded a conversation yesterday with someone who's been listening to your real opinions all along. Would you like me to play some highlights? Your comments about these relationships never lasting? Your hope that I'd come to my senses eventually? Both of them looked stricken. Mom's hands were trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to acknowledge that your behavior toward me and Marcus was rooted in racism, not parental concern. You're going to admit that you hoped my marriage would fail so you could say I told you so. And you're going to understand that your sudden change of heart isn't forgiveness-worthy because it's based on dollar signs, not growth. April, please, Mom whispered. We love you. We want to be part of your life. No, you want to be part of Marcus's success. You want to be associated with his achievements now that you know about them. You want to throw us a reception so you can show off to your friends. You want investment opportunities and business connections and social status. That's not true, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Because where was this love when I needed support during wedding planning? Where was this family pride when I was building a life with an incredible man you never bothered to know? Where were these values when I was happy but not rich enough for your approval? I stood up, placing my napkin on the table with deliberate calm. I'm not interested in a relationship based on Marcus's net worth. I'm not interested in pretending your racism was reasonable caution. And I'm definitely not interested in giving you access to the success you tried to protect me from. What are you saying? Mom asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. I'm saying that some bridges can't be rebuilt, especially when they were burned by choice rather than accident. You chose to miss my wedding. You chose to hope for my divorce. You chose to see my husband as a threat rather than a blessing. Those weren't mistakes, they were decisions that showed me exactly who you are. I picked up my purse and coat, preparing to leave them sitting in the restaurant just as Mom had left me sitting there during our engagement confrontation. Sarah will always be welcome in our lives because she stood by us when it mattered, I said. But you two lost the privilege of being part of our story when you decided to write us out of yours. April? Wait, Dad called as I turned to go. We can work this out. We can do better. You had 12 months to do better, I replied without turning around. You chose not to. Now it's too late. I walked out of the restaurant with my head high and my conscience clear. Behind me, I left two people finally understanding that actions have consequences and that some damage can't be undone with belated apologies. In the parking lot, I called Marcus. It's done, I said when he answered. I told them exactly what kind of relationship we can have going forward, which is none. I'm done with conditional love and racism disguised as concern. We're better off without them. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Are you sure? Last chance to change your mind. I thought about the family dinners I'd miss, the holidays that would be smaller, the grandchildren they'd never know. Then I thought about the peace of not having to perform for people who'd never truly accepted me or my choices. I'm absolutely sure. Some people don't deserve access to your happiness, even if they're family, especially if they're family. 6 months later, Marcus and I sat in our beautifully renovated kitchen, sharing coffee and reading the Sunday paper like the happily married couple we'd always been. The difference was that now we were doing it without the shadow of my parents' disapproval hanging over our lives. The business section has another article about your expansion, I said, pointing to a photo of Marcus cutting the ribbon at his latest store opening. You're practically famous now. Practically successful enough to buy my wife another Porsche, he replied with a grin, leaning over to kiss my cheek. Life without my parents had been surprisingly liberating. Instead of spending emotional energy trying to earn their approval or managing their disappointment, I'd been free to simply enjoy the amazing life we'd built together. Marcus's business continued thriving. My own career had flourished without family drama as a distraction, and our marriage had deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Sarah had become even more important to us, stepping fully into the role of supportive family member. She'd been our biggest cheerleader when Marcus won a Retail Innovation Award last month, and she'd helped me plan the surprise party for his 30th birthday. Our relationship had strengthened once it was freed from the complexity of divided family loyalties. "Have you heard from them lately?" Marcus asked, reading my mind as he often did. "Mom texted yesterday," I said, showing him my phone. "Happy anniversary. Hope you're both well." The message was typical of their recent attempts at contact, superficially friendly, but devoid of any real acknowledgement of what had happened between us. They'd been sending birthday cards and holiday greetings for months, acting like we were estranged due to a simple misunderstanding rather than their systematic racism. "Are you going to respond?" "I already did," I said, pulling up my reply. "Thank you." 2 words. Polite, but not encouraging. I'd decided that complete silence felt too harsh, but I wasn't going to pretend we had a relationship beyond basic courtesy. "Sarah says they ask about us constantly," I continued. "Apparently Mom has been telling people that we're going through a difficult phase, but that she's confident we'll work things out eventually. Still rewriting history. Always. They can't accept that this is permanent, that some consequences last forever." Marcus reached across the table to take my hand. "Any regrets?" I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret losing my parents? Yes, in the sense that I grieved for the parents I'd wanted them to be versus the ones they actually were. Did I regret standing up for myself and my marriage? Not for a single second. None, I said firmly. Every day I'm grateful that I chose us over them. Every day I'm proud that I didn't accept conditional love. Even when you see other families together, other daughters with their mothers, especially then, because I know what real love looks like now. I know what it feels like to be chosen and cherished and supported unconditionally. Why would I settle for less from anyone, including family? The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Through the window, I could see a delivery truck in our driveway. Marcus went to answer the door while I cleared our breakfast dishes. "April," he called from the hallway. "You need to see this." I found him holding an enormous arrangement of white roses and peonies, the same flowers from our wedding. The card attached was written in Mom's careful handwriting. "Thinking of you both on your anniversary. Love always, Mom and Dad." I stared at the arrangement for a long moment, processing the emotions it triggered. The flowers were beautiful, obviously expensive, and completely meaningless coming from people who'd missed the wedding they were supposedly commemorating. "What do you want to do with them?" Marcus asked gently. I took the card and read it again. Love always. From people who'd withdrawn their love the moment I made a choice they disapproved of. From people who'd spent a year hoping my marriage would fail so they could be proven right about their prejudices. "Take them to the neighbors," I decided. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned that her husband's in the hospital. She could probably use some flowers." Marcus smiled and kissed my forehead. "I love you, Mrs. Johnson." "I love you too, Mr. Johnson." As he carried the flowers next door, I watched through the window and felt a deep sense of contentment settle over me. This was what happiness looked like: a Sunday morning with my husband, plans for the week ahead, and the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Saw the Forbes article about Marcus's new expansion plans. You guys are going to take over the world. Dinner this week to celebrate?" I typed back quickly. "Absolutely. Tuesday work for you? Marcus wants to try that new place downtown." This was family people who celebrated our successes, supported our dreams, and loved us not, despite our choices but because of them. People who showed up when it mattered and stayed loyal when it was difficult. 20 minutes later, Marcus returned from delivering the flowers. "Mrs. Peterson was thrilled," he reported. "She said they're the most beautiful flowers she's ever received." "Good. They'll bring someone joy instead of obligation." That afternoon, we drove to the lake for a picnic, the same lake where Marcus had proposed 2 years earlier. As we sat on our blanket watching boats drift across the water, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment of peace. "Do you think they'll ever understand what they lost?" I asked. Marcus considered the question while unwrapping sandwiches. "Maybe someday, but by then it won't matter because we'll have built something so beautiful without them that their approval will be irrelevant." He was right. We were building something beautiful, a marriage based on mutual respect, a business empire that reflected Marcus's vision and values, and a chosen family that supported us unconditionally. We were creating the life we wanted, without waiting for permission from people who'd never really known us anyway. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life dramas about choosing yourself over other people's limitations. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept anything less than you deserve. As the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I leaned against my husband's shoulder and felt profoundly grateful for every choice that had led us here. including the hardest choice of all, walking away from family members who couldn't love us the way we deserve to be loved. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness. But sometimes the most powerful ending is the one where you simply stop waiting for people to change and start living fully in the love you've already found. And that, I realized, was exactly the ending our story deserved.